Bank of England blinked, and when things became tough, they're fighting inflation, but then they stepped into the bond market to support it. My view is, I think we are in a situation where an investor has to ask himself, the only hedging mechanism that I think makes sense is diversification. I mean, if I look at today's performances of markets and assets, the asset class that went up is oil and gas, energy. The best performing is the one that was hated the most by the Greens, coal. They have all the negative things about coal, and it's been performing wonderfully. And there are lots of coal stocks that are up 4 or 5 times in 1 year. I described briefly how inflation touches different sectors of the economy at different times. So we had the asset inflation 1981 to recently. Now we may have consumer price inflation, which then leads to higher interest rates structurally. These are long cycles, they can last 20 years. So let's assume that interest rates go up for a long time, like between 1942 and 1980, then you can have rising earnings and you can have an economy that actually moves sideways and stocks in real terms lose their value. Market in the US between 66 and 1982 was essentially flat. It didn't go up, but it was essentially flat. If you include the dividends, you didn't do all that bad because the dividends were relatively high, which is not the case now. But in real terms, inflation adjusted, and that was reflected in the weakness of the US dollar. Stocks went down by 70%, okay? So you take a peak somewhere 2018, 2019, 2020, whenever you want to take the peak, and not every stock peaked out the same day. The last ones to peak out was FANG stocks like Apple. They peaked out in January of this year. Anyway, to make a long story short, different assets peak out at different times. My sense is that we are in a period of lengthy, unattractive environment for assets. Whether you own real estate, the government is gonna F you because they're gonna increase taxes on real estate or on transactions, or in the socialist states in the US, they'll impose rent controls. Mm-hmm. Rent controls is for the business owner, for the owner of apartment buildings, the worst, because his cost of maintenance go up, but he can't charge more to his tenants.
Right, it caps your earning potential, but your costs are not capped.
Yes, yeah. And the people that run the governments nowadays, they're bloody interventionists. That's the biggest problem. They all think they're smart. They all think they should intervene in the economy. I mean, Biden, you look at him, he intervenes continuously and says continuously something about things he has no clue about. I mean, I'm not a fan of Trump, but to be fair to Trump, he reduced regulation. This is the only thing he did. I'm an international person. I'm Swiss. I had and still have my business based in Hong Kong, but I live in Thailand. Now, I want to have some assets in Thailand because I live here. Because I think maybe one day I can't remit money from the US to Thailand, or I can't remit money from Switzerland to Thailand, and so forth and so on. So I have some assets here. Not because I have great confidence in Thailand, but I have to say, it's a military government, and I feel much freer under my military government here than under the Swiss democratically elected government in Switzerland. So I have some money here. First of all, the property is not mine, it's in my wife and daughter's name. But the bank account is in my name and the portfolio is in my name. And I have some properties in Vietnam and some stock investments in Vietnam. But the logistic is the custody is in Vietnam. It's not Vietnamese stocks held through an American bank. If you want the geographical diversification, You can't hold all your assets in one bank, and they own shares in Brazil and some in Russia and some there. You have to have the custody in different geographical locations. You don't know what the nutcases in governments will do, and in NATO, suddenly if a country trades, say, with Russia, they will be suddenly put on a blacklist or something like this.
Right. But this did happen. So American ADR holders who own shares in Gazprom and Lukoil and all the major, publicly traded, big companies, those all have been frozen.
Yes, correct. The second point I want to make, and nobody has told me what will really happen when the dollar will begin to weaken considerably. Now, you may say, Mark, don't be stupid. The dollar will never be weak. Okay, then I'm stupid to think about it. But in my view, the likelihood that the dollar will one day be kind of the currency that nobody wants is, in my opinion, quite likely. I'm not telling you that it's happening, it will happen tomorrow or the day after tomorrow. But one day, the dollar will become very weak. And at that stage, it will become very interesting what happens to interest rates and what happens to the economy and so forth and so on. I don't want to sound overly bullish and I don't want to sound overly bearish. But if I look at the US market compared to the emerging markets and compared to European markets, it has outperformed just about everything over the last 11 years. And emerging markets have performed very badly relative to the US since 2015. Some a bit later, some a bit earlier. I think that in emerging economies, that's my observation. I'm not bullish about Thailand. I think in Thailand, the valuations are okay. You buy today, maybe they'll drop another 30%, but eventually they'll be higher. You buy today the semiconductors in the US, I'm not sure they'll be much higher 10 years from now. Latin America is probably geographically the place that could maybe stay out of World War III, World War IV. So to have some assets in Argentina and Brazil may not be so stupid. I also think in China, there are now some good companies that are reasonably priced. Vietnam is the country that is interesting. It has essentially a strong economy. The economy is doing well. The stock market has been hit very hard. I believe equally there are some good companies that are reasonably priced for the first time in many years. In Indonesia, you have reasonably priced companies. Hong Kong shares are dirt cheap. I look at this way because I'm an asset holder. I may be wrong because I don't have major hedges. My hedge is that I have a relatively large cash position, which includes bonds that mature within a year or two. But I look at it this way. I think a lot of people will lose all their money. A lot of people will lose 50%. I hope I will only lose, say, 15 to 20%. Don't think in the world that government officials are like angels and all the businessmen are evil. Not at all. Don't believe for a second that in Western democracies, the governments are nice people. No, they're all utterly corrupt. They all take money. Why is the government so big? Because the socialists wanted to make it bigger and bigger and bigger. And the reaction is for the corporations to say, okay, doesn't disturb us. We're gonna F them. The price of gold and silver and platinum have been weak. It's an investment that is neglected. It's not the best investment, but it is an avenue to lose less money, to have something in your custody, but you have to decide where you want to keep it, under your mattress or in your garden or in a safe deposit box and so forth. This is a decision you have to take. But basically, I would use this weakness to accumulate some which I buy every month gold for the last 40 years.